Each Sunday morning, we talk about the 3 refuges. So I'd like to explore that teaching a little bit and to help make the distinction between what I call the true refuges and the false refuges. The true refuge is refuge, taking refuge in the Buddha, which means taking refuge in our own Buddha nature, our own essential nature, the reality of what we are, that cannot be described in words, that cannot be contained in time or space. The radiant, pure, vast Buddha nature. And to take refuge in the Buddha means that as we sit in our practice, we engage the practice as the Buddha. We meet each moment as the Buddha. Not trying to become the Buddha, but sitting in the experience of being the Buddha. And as we do that, then we experience a lot of things. And some of these things we experience may convince us that we're not the Buddha. So we just notice that bit of craving or resistance or whatever it might be. And we meet that with the Buddha nature. So the practice is to rest in the Buddha nature. And whatever arises, we meet that with the Buddha nature. With open, clear mind, open, clear heart. With wisdom and with compassion. So we're not trying to get somewhere, we're simply meeting each experience that arises in the moment with the presence of the Buddha. Taking refuge in the Dharma means not only studying the teachings and engaging the practices, but it also means living the Dharma. One meaning of the Dharma might be what's called the way, sometimes with a capital W. The way meaning the many things. It can mean a way of life, the way we live, the way we conduct our life. And likewise the Sangha. It is the community with which we sit and practice, but it's also all of our relations. All relationships with all beings eventually become part of the practice of Sangha. So the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha have no limits. We're never done as it is. And yet, paradoxically, there's nowhere to go. we're always deepening our awareness as we practice in each moment. The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And as we do this, we begin to discover what I call the false refuges. And these false refuges are not mistakes, not something we've done wrong or bad, but it is an inevitable part of our human conditioning. We are conditioned to find refuge in the world. Infants are biologically conditioned to find refuge in their parents. Children find refuge in their parents, in their families. It's instinctual. And then as we grow older, we may find refuge in our peers or school or social circle. And as we move into adulthood, we find refuge in maybe our career, or our marriage, or our family, or our possessions, or our social roles or status. Refuge simply means where I go for ultimate meaning and value. Refuge means what is the most real thing in my life. Not theoretically, not philosophically, but as I live my life. What is it that's real? What is it that is the core of my values, my beliefs, my behaviors, my words? That's what refuge means, ultimately. And so we begin, as we take the three refuges, we begin a process of discovering how we have identified with the false refuges. Perhaps in the world around us, something or someone. And perhaps more often with something internal. Virtually all of us learn to take refuge in the mind, to take refuge in our thinking, to take refuge in our understanding. We take refuge in our beliefs. Perhaps we take refuge in scientific understanding or logic, reason, rationality. Maybe we take refuge in our emotions or desires. What is it that is at the center of our life? Once again, not in theory, but as we live our life. At a very young age, we learn a particular strategy for survival, based upon how we perceive our parents and our family system, we adapt ourselves. And that adaptation becomes part of our identity. In fact, it becomes the core of our identity. Our human identity, not our true identity. But our human identity, our sense of me, my sense of I. So we may learn to take refuge in being perfect, being good, being right, being responsible, helping others, pleasing others, doing good things. We may take refuge in our accomplishments, our skills, being the best at everything. We may take refuge in our intellect, in our understanding, our knowledge, our degrees or diplomas. We may take refuge in being strong, being tough. Or conversely, we may take refuge in being nice and accommodating. We may even take refuge in being invisible, accommodating and deferring to others. There are many strategies that are adopted and then adapted to our life. And without examination, without awareness, without practice, we live our lives believing this is who we are and this is what's real. As we engage the refuges, the true refuges, we begin to see all of these places. And they begin to fall away. The old loyalties, the old identities. And as they fall away, that can be frightening or painful, almost always difficult in some way. And inevitably, someone will say, what do I do with all of that when that happens? And the answer is simply to meet that with the Buddha nature, to meet that with the three refuges, the true refuges. Even our fears, even our rage, even our shame, we meet with the Buddha nature. And eventually that becomes clearer and clearer, more transparent. We don't lose our human identity or the ability to function in the world. We simply don't take that as a refuge. We don't take that as the ultimate sense of me or of reality. We see that like the clothing we wear or the vehicles we drive, instruments that may be useful, but it's not who we really are. And we begin to see that the refuge of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha is vast, infinite in depth, in breadth. So the great paradox is that we are always the Buddha, and yet there is no end to the journey of discovering the infinite Buddha. And always it's done in the same way. Simply being present with an open mind and an open heart, meeting each experience in this moment with wisdom and with compassion. So thank you for sharing your practice with us this morning.